While I was stationed at Checkpoint Charlie, my dad sold my house to pay off my daddy's girl sister. When I returned, they laughed. "You are homeless now." I smiled. "What is funny?" they snapped. I replied, and they were speechless. My heavy military duffel bag hit the porch floor with a dull, echoing thud. Dust caked my boots and deep, bone-rattling exhaustion burned behind my eyes. I stared past them into the long hallway I had built with every single dollar of my savings, only to find my entire life liquidated for a stranger's shopping spree. I stepped over the threshold, my muscles still vibrating from the 20-hour flight. I was 28 years old, a combat medic who had spent the last 2 years wrapping tourniquets under artillery fire, dreaming of this exact living room. A $450,000 sanctuary in San Antonio, Texas, paid for with literal blood, sweat, and sleepless nights. The air inside felt stale, heavy, and completely suffocating. Manfred paraded down the stairs, her expensive heels clicking against the custom hardwood I had installed by hand. She wore my favorite silk dress, the delicate seams stretching uncomfortably across her shoulders, but the stolen fabric barely registered in my mind. The gold chain resting against her collarbone caught the bright afternoon light. My mother's pendant. The one thing in the entire world I kept locked inside my heavy fireproof safe. My jaw locked tight. I took a sharp, aggressive step forward, my hand extending to rip the stolen metal right off her neck. A heavy, calloused palm slammed into my chest before my fingers could even graze the gold. The sheer force of the impact sent me flying backward. My right shoulder blade cracked violently against the solid oak doorframe. A sharp, stinging pain shot down my spine, vibrating straight into my teeth. Jackson stood towering over me, his face twisted in a vicious, ugly sneer. He kicked my military duffel bag right off the porch. The heavy canvas tumbled down the concrete steps, spilling my meager belongings out into the Texas dirt. "Are you trying to start a riot in this house?" He spat his thick finger, jabbing the empty space just inches from my nose. "Manfred is a public figure now. She needs this specific aesthetic. She needs a proper, wealthy background for her brand. You only joined the army because you were too incredibly stupid to get a real job out in the real world. What do you even need a luxury house for? You are entirely used to sleeping in the mud." He crossed his arms, his chest puffing out with absolute intoxicating arrogance. "I used the power of attorney. I transferred the deed myself. She owns this place now. You are just an uninvited guest. Learn your proper place or get off her property immediately." A porcelain cup clinked sharply against a saucer. Aunt Brenda sat cross-legged on my velvet sofa, casually blowing steam off her chamomile tea. She looked down her nose at me, her mouth pinched in sheer annoyance, acting as if my bruised shoulder was completely ruining her relaxing afternoon. "Oh, stop being so incredibly dramatic, Morgan," she sighed, her voice dripping with fake, condescending pity. "Your father is entirely right about this. You are always gone on dangerous deployments anyway. Let your sister have this beautiful home. She needs it for her networking and her growing career. We are family. You make a massive scene over a simple piece of property, and you make us all look terrible in front of the neighbors. An older sister is supposed to sacrifice for the younger ones. Stop being so bitter and just accept your reality." The silence in the room stretched out heavy, thick, and absolutely lethal. My rigorous combat training kicked in, pulling a cold steel curtain over my racing heart. Triage. Assess the bleeding. Identify the fatal wound. A normal person would scream until their throat bled. A normal person would throw wild punches, demand legal answers, or collapse into a pathetic puddle of tears. I swallowed the metallic, bitter taste of blood in my mouth. I slowly pushed myself off the solid doorframe, dusted the red Texas dirt off my uniform, and looked dead into Jackson's eyes. I let the absolute freezing quiet fill the room. Let them think they won. Let them revel in their stolen victory. Manfred stepped right over the threshold, her chin tilted up, emboldened by my absolute silence. She mistook my fierce discipline for weak submission. She always did. "What are you staring at?" Manfred sneered, her voice shrill and bouncing off the vaulted ceiling. "Do you honestly think just because you threw some dirty money at this place, it actually belongs to you? You are so incredibly stupid, Morgan. You are nothing but a glorified ditch digger in a uniform. You belong out in the dirt with the rest of the trash. Drag your garbage off my porch right now, or I am calling the local police for criminal trespassing." I am the legal owner here. I am the one people actually care about. Now get out of my sight before you completely ruin my flawless afternoon." Her shrill words hit the air, leaving a toxic, lingering residue, and my mind violently pulled me 5,000 miles away. The smooth, hardwood floor vanished entirely beneath my heavy boots. Instead, my bruised knees were buried deep in freezing, blood-soaked sand. The blinding Texas sun faded into the pitch-black night of an active combat zone. I was pressing both hands into the shattered chest of a 19-year-old kid, begging him to keep breathing while heavy mortar fire shook the earth violently around us. I spent 24 grueling months living in a state of constant suffocating terror, saving every single dollar of my hazard pay entirely for this house. $450,000 of blood, sweat, and absolute nightmare poured directly into the foundation of a sanctuary I could finally call my own. They broke me when I was an insecure teenager, shrinking my entire world down to the size of their conditional approval. But today, they were standing squarely in my crosshairs, and I was the one holding the heavy hammer. "I said get your garbage and leave," Manfred shrieked, her face twisting into an ugly, deeply impatient scowl. She clapped her hands together twice, treating me exactly like a filthy stray dog that had wandered onto her pristine, manicured lawn. Jackson nodded in firm agreement, puffing out his chest even further, acting exactly like a brave king defending his stolen castle. Aunt Brenda took another slow, deliberate sip of her warm tea, completely unfazed by the toxic venom dripping from her favorite niece's mouth. She just casually adjusted a velvet throw pillow and looked out the large bay window. The reality of the situation crystallized in my mind with perfect, terrifying clarity. These horrible people standing in front of me were not my family. Blood was just a random biological coincidence. They were absolute parasites. They fed on my endless guilt, drained my physical energy, and demanded my absolute silence to keep their twisted, abusive little reality spinning. They expected a broken, crying victim. They expected a desperate daughter begging for a tiny scrap of validation, ready to negotiate her own firm boundaries just to keep the peace. I let out a slow, steady breath. My racing heart rate dropped back to a perfect, calm, resting rhythm. The time for peaceful negotiating was completely over. If they wanted to play ruthless games with my livelihood, I was going to gladly let them dig their own permanent graves. I let my shoulders slump forward. I dropped my chin, staring blankly at the hardwood floor, projecting the perfect, flawless image of a defeated, broken daughter. The aggressive tension in Jackson's shoulders instantly evaporated. An incredibly smug, triumphant grin spread widely across his aging face. He actually thought he had won the war. I unzipped the small side pocket of my tactical bag and pulled out a single, neatly folded sheet of paper. It was a federal property transfer acknowledgement form. I requested it from the base legal office weeks ago, treating it as a simple, routine precaution. Now it was a loaded weapon. "Fine," I said, my voice intentionally dropping to a hollow, broken whisper. I held the crisp paper out toward Manfred. The temporary power of attorney is not legally enough for a specialized military loan. If you really want the house, you have to sign this federal release form. Once your ink is firmly on that line, the property is officially yours. No more legal disputes. Manfred snatched the paper aggressively from my hand, her eyes quickly scanning the dense, complicated legal text she clearly lacked the mental capacity to understand. I took a slow, deliberate step back. You should probably go live for this exact moment. Your loyal followers always want to see your big, wealthy wins, right? Show them exactly how you easily got your dream home. Her eyes lit up with pure, unadulterated greed. The trap was incredibly obvious, but her massive, fragile ego swallowed the bait whole. She whipped out her expensive phone, tapped the bright screen, and instantly launched a live broadcast to her 50,000 eager followers. She flipped her hair dramatically, flashing a bright, flawless plastic smile directly into the camera lens. "Hey guys," Manfred chirped, her voice instantly dropping that nasty, shrill tone for her sweet, highly manufactured internet persona. "I have the absolute most amazing news today. I am officially signing the final deed to my brand new $450,000 luxury estate. My amazing dad made it all happen for me." Jackson stepped right into the digital frame, completely intoxicated by the bright spotlight. He wrapped a thick, protective arm around Manfred's shoulder, puffing his chest out proudly for the thousands of anonymous viewers rapidly rolling into the live chat. "That is right," Jackson boasted, his voice booming proudly through the tiny phone speaker. "The military tries to lock these properties down with all this ridiculous federal red tape. They told me I could not legally transfer it while Morgan was deployed overseas. But I know exactly how to work the system. I just signed the secondary closing documents myself, a little creative paperwork, a very friendly local notary, and boom. The house belongs to my real girl now." Aunt Brenda clapped her hands together excitedly from the sofa, cheering them on loudly like they had just won the massive state lottery. "Oh, smile big for the camera, Jackson. You are such an incredibly good father." My heart beat a slow, steady drum against my ribs. Jackson just openly confessed to federal wire fraud, malicious deed tampering, and forging official documents to bypass the Service Members Civil Relief Act, and he did it live on the internet in front of thousands of digital witnesses. Manfred leaned heavily over the cold marble kitchen island. She clicked her expensive gold designer pen. The metal tip pressed firmly against the signature line of the federal document. The dark ink bled deeply into the paper, permanently locking her given name next to a staggering federal crime. She held the signed paper up to the glowing screen of her phone, blowing a dramatic, performative kiss to her adoring audience. The live comment section exploded with thousands of red heart emojis. They truly thought they were showing off the ultimate brilliant victory. They were throwing a massive digital parade for their own criminal brilliance. They had absolutely no idea they just gladly handed the United States government a perfectly wrapped, airtight felony conviction. Barely 10 minutes passed. The heavy champagne cork popped, echoing off the high ceilings like a loud gunshot. Manfred propped her phone against the ceramic fruit bowl on the marble island, keeping the live stream running so her 50,000 followers could watch her sip expensive bubbles in her stolen kitchen. She tossed her hair back, laughing loudly at a cruel joke Jackson made about my dirty military gear. Jackson poured a full, bubbling glass of champagne for Aunt Brenda, clinking their glasses together in a loud toast to their brilliance. They were throwing a victory parade right in my face. I stood quietly in the corner, perfectly still, letting the invisible clock tick down. A deafening, violent crash shattered the joyful celebration. The heavy oak front door flew open, the reinforced metal hinges screaming as the wood splintered inward. 4 federal agents stormed the living room in a synchronized, terrifying wave of black tactical gear. Federal agents, hands where we can see them right now. The expensive champagne flute slipped entirely from Manfred's grip. It shattered loudly across the hardwood floor, sending sticky, sweet alcohol splashing against her bare ankles. 2 heavily armed agents lunged straight for the kitchen island. They grabbed Manfred violently by both shoulders, spinning her around with zero hesitation. She let out a piercing, utterly terrified shriek. Her jaw hit the cold marble countertop with a hard, ugly thud. "Get off me! I am a famous influencer." "Do you know who I am?" Manfred screamed, thrashing wildly against the heavy weight of the officers. The harsh, metallic click of steel handcuffs snapped shut, locking her wrists tight. The terrible sound echoed straight into the open microphone of her phone. The camera captured every single humiliating second. 50,000 people watched in real time as the flawless, rich internet persona completely evaporated. Her face contorted into an ugly, tear-soaked grimace, thick black mascara running down her cheeks as she sobbed uncontrollably. The live chat instantly exploded. Thousands of comments relentlessly mocked her, calling her a total fraud, screen recording her absolute public destruction. Her entire fake digital empire burned completely to the ground in less than 30 seconds. Jackson dropped his heavy champagne bottle. It rolled across the floor, spilling expensive liquor entirely over his shiny shoes. The arrogant king of the castle completely crumpled. His weak knees gave out beneath him, his heavy body hitting the floor with a pathetic hollow thud. He held his shaking hands up, his fingers trembling so violently he could barely keep them straight. All the chest-puffing bravado vanished completely. He looked incredibly small, weak, and absolutely terrified. Wait. This is a massive misunderstanding. Jackson stammered, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, desperate whine as a large agent yanked his arms forcefully behind his back. "I am her father. We are just family. It is a private family dispute. Tell them, Morgan. Tell them right now." "Shut your mouth," the lead agent barked, forcing Jackson's face firmly toward the floor. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, deed tampering, and violating the Service Members Civil Relief Act." Aunt Brenda swallowed her previous arrogant speech about family sacrifice, entirely choking on her own massive hypocrisy. The delicate porcelain teacup slipped from her shaking fingers, shattering into dozens of sharp pieces over her expensive leather shoes. She pressed her spine deep into the velvet sofa cushions, pulling her knees tight to her chest, exactly like a frightened animal. Her face drained of all natural color, turning a sickly, ghostly white. She stared wide-eyed at the agents, her jaw trembling in pure, silent horror. The vicious woman who had just demanded my absolute obedience was now shrinking entirely into the upholstery, praying the angry agents would just completely ignore her. I stepped forward. My heavy combat boots crunched right over the broken champagne glass. I walked past my groveling father and my sobbing sister. I picked up Manfred's phone from the counter. The live stream chat was moving so incredibly fast the text blurred together in a white stream. I looked down at Manfred, her cheek pressed hard against the marble, her dark eyes pleading for mercy. I reached over, tapped the red button, and ended the broadcast forever. The screen went pitch black. Their massive arrogance built the perfect trap. My silence simply let them walk directly into it. The heavy boots of the federal agents scraped loudly against the hardwood. They hauled Jackson up from the floor by his biceps. His expensive leather shoes dragged across the spilled champagne and shattered glass. The sheer panic exploding in his chest pushed him past all humiliation. He twisted his neck, his red tear-streaked face searching frantically for me. Morgan. He bawled, the pathetic sound ripping from his throat like a dying animal. Morgan, please. You have to tell them to stop. Tell them to drop the charges. I am your father. I gave you life. You cannot do this to your own family. His desperate pleas bounced off the high ceiling, completely worthless. I stared right through him. The terrible man who had violently shoved me into a doorframe 20 minutes ago was now sobbing for his own life, begging for the exact mercy he had just violently denied me. I turned my back entirely on his pathetic display and walked toward the kitchen island. Manfred stood firmly pinned between two agents, her wrists locked incredibly tight behind her back. Her narrow shoulders shook violently. Mascara ran down her cheeks in thick, dark streaks, permanently staining the collar of my silk dress. She sniffled loudly, her eyes darting wildly, silently pleading with me to save her. I stepped right into her personal space. I raised my hand. Manfred flinched, squeezing her eyes tightly shut, fully expecting a violent slap. Instead, my steady fingers curled around the delicate gold chain resting against her collarbone. The metal rested warm against my skin. I gave a sharp, deliberate yank. The small gold clasp snapped instantly. I pulled my mother's pendant completely free from her neck and wrapped it tightly in my fist. The sharp edges of the gold dug deeply into my palm, grounding me, pulling me back to reality. My house, I whispered the cold words slicing right through her panicked sobs. My clothes. My mother. I turned around to face Jackson, who was now halfway out the front door, struggling weakly against the agent's iron grip. Aunt Brenda still sat frozen on the sofa, clutching a velvet pillow tight against her chest as a pathetic shield. She sat there, a completely cowardly woman, stripped of her moral high ground. I met Jackson's terrified gaze one last time. "Since we are all family," I said, my voice echoing perfectly clear across the destroyed living room, "you and Manfred can sacrifice for each other in federal prison." The agents shoved him forcefully out onto the porch. The door remained wide open. I shifted my attention back to the sofa. Aunt Brenda shrank back, her eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated terror. She opened her mouth to speak, to offer some pathetic excuse, but the cowardly words died entirely in her throat. "Get off my property," I commanded. My voice held absolutely no anger, just the cold, final authority of an eviction. She scrambled off the cushions, her heavy designer purse slipping from her shoulder and spilling loudly onto the floor. She practically tripped over her own feet, rushing past me without making a single sound. She sprinted desperately down the driveway, rushing to escape the federal vehicles, flashing red and blue across the manicured lawn. I stepped out onto the porch. I watched them shove my father and my sister into the back of two separate black vehicles. The heavy doors slammed shut. The engines roared to life. The tires crunched over the gravel as they drove away, taking all the toxicity, the endless manipulation, and the deafening noise with them forever. I stepped back inside. I grabbed the brass handle of my splintered front door and pushed it closed. The latch clicked firmly into place. I walked into the kitchen, grabbed a broom, and began sweeping up the shattered champagne glass. Absolute golden silence filled my home. The air inside my house transformed. For the first time in my entire life, my heavy shoulders dropped and I could finally breathe. The wooden gavel struck the heavy block on a crisp Tuesday morning in November. The federal judge looked down from the elevated bench with absolute undisguised disgust. The federal court system does not care at all about emotional family drama or tearful apologies. They care about paper trails, and Jackson left a massive one on a live internet broadcast. The judge formally sentenced my father to 60 months in a federal penitentiary without the slightest possibility of early parole. The court also ordered a staggering $250,000 in restitution and federal fines. Every single penny of his retirement fund was completely wiped out. He traded his arrogant golden years for a tiny concrete cell and a cold metal toilet. Manfred fared no better. The judge sentenced her to 36 months in a federal correctional facility and ordered her to pay $75,000. But her punishment extended far beyond the cold walls of the courtroom. The major social media platforms permanently banned her accounts for violating strict fraud policies. Her 50,000 followers vanished into thin air overnight. Her entire fake influencer empire shattered into a million unrecoverable pieces. She became a permanent, tragic laughingstock on the very internet she worshipped. And Aunt Brenda. She was not criminally charged, but her social execution was absolute. The local evening news ran the explosive story of the federal raid. The women in her strict church group read every single humiliating detail. Within a week, she was entirely ostracized. There were no more invitations to Sunday brunches. There were no more polite waves from the neighbors over the fence. She became a silent, pathetic ghost in her own neighborhood, forced to sit alone in her living room, drinking her tea in absolute suffocating isolation. 8 months passed. The brutal Texas summer eventually surrendered to a cool, quiet autumn. I walked out to my mailbox one morning and pulled out a stack of utility bills. Buried at the bottom was a thin beige envelope stamped by the federal prison mail system. I recognized Jackson's jagged, hurried handwriting immediately. I carried it inside and sliced it open with a kitchen knife. It was exactly what I expected. There was zero accountability. There was absolutely no apology for stealing my home, shoving me into a door frame, or attempting to erase my sacrifices. Instead, the page was dripping with transparent, disgusting manipulation. He complained heavily about the terrible cafeteria food. He complained about his aging back hurting on the thin prison mattress. He wrote that he was a frail old man, that I was still his daughter, and that God commands children to forgive their parents. He ended the letter by demanding I deposit $500 into his prison commissary account because family takes care of family. My chest remained completely still. My heart maintained a slow, perfectly steady rhythm. I walked over to the home office. I fed the letter directly into the paper shredder. The metal blades grabbed the heavy paper, grinding his pathetic manipulation into tiny, unreadable strips of confetti. I emptied the plastic bin entirely into the trash, walked back to the kitchen, and poured myself a fresh cup of dark roast coffee. The air in my house remained perfectly light. I had completely moved on. My sanctuary looks entirely different now. The heavy, suffocating tension that used to cling to the walls is completely gone. I repainted the living room a warm, inviting white, scrubbing away every lingering trace of their presence. The hardwood floors shine perfectly free of shattered champagne glass and toxic footsteps. On Friday nights, my backyard comes completely to life. I fired up the grill yesterday afternoon. Sergeant Miller, the brave man who dragged me behind a concrete wall during a mortar strike, stood by the fire flipping burgers. Clara, a brilliant combat nurse from my deployment, sat on the patio furniture laughing so hard she spilled her drink. These incredible people never ask me to shrink myself. They never demand I sacrifice my hard-earned peace to accommodate their terrible flaws. This is my true chosen family. We share a bond forged deeply in mutual respect, survival, and absolute loyalty. When one of us falls, the others reach out a firm hand. We do not exploit each other. We violently protect each other. The contrast between the chaotic, screaming nightmares of my past and the grounded, beautiful peace of my present is staggering. If you are watching this, I want you to step back and look at your own life. Look at the people sitting at your dinner table. We are conditioned from birth to falsely believe that the people who share our biology are inherently safe. We are taught to continually forgive the unforgivable simply because of a matching last name. But narcissists like Jackson and Manfred do not love you. They strictly love what they can extract from you. They view your massive success, your hard-earned money, and your fragile peace as a shared resource that they are completely entitled to drain dry. When you finally establish a firm, unyielding boundary, they do not see it as a plea for respect. They see it as a total act of war. They believe your absolute refusal to be abused is a personal attack against their authority. And then there are the enablers, the Aunt Brendas of the world. They are just as incredibly dangerous as the abusers themselves. The enabler watches the sharp knife go into your back and tells you to stop bleeding because it is ruining the aesthetic of the room. They demand that you keep the peace, but they do not actually care about true peace. They just want you to quietly absorb the terrible abuse so they do not have to deal with the abuser's loud tantrums. I paid a massive, exhausting price to learn the absolute truth, but I walked away with 3 ironclad rules for survival. Rule number 1. Blood is just biology, but loyalty is family. Sharing DNA does not grant anyone a lifelong, unrestricted license to exploit your hard work. You are allowed to permanently walk away from people who hurt you, even if society tells you to stay and suffer endlessly. Rule number 2. Silence is a weapon, not a weakness. When an arrogant, entitled person tries to break you, do not scream. Do not argue. Do not try to explain your deep pain to someone who is deeply committed to completely misunderstanding you. Step back, stay quiet, and let them furiously dig their own graves. Their unchecked, massive arrogance will always be their ultimate downfall. Rule number 3. Never negotiate your boundaries with emotional terrorists. Toxic people rely entirely on your internal guilt. If you cut the guilt, you completely cut their power. Set your standard, lock the heavy door, and throw away the key. Now I want to turn this over to you. Put yourself in my heavy combat boots. If you came home from a grueling deployment and found your own blood selling your sanctuary and wearing your dead mother's memories, what would you do? Would you have swallowed your pride to keep the fragile peace, or would you have let the federal agents completely kick the door in? Let me know your absolute honest thoughts in the comments below. And please, tell me what city or country you are watching from. I want to know exactly how far this critical lesson has traveled. My name is Morgan Gomez. I fought fiercely for my peace. I protected my sanctuary, and I am finally free.